Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Good evening and welcome to this week's worldwide broadcast of The Joyner Report. Now here's your host, Angela Joyner.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another Friday night edition of The Joyner Report on WPRN FM New Orleans and at UFOParanormalRadioNetwork.com. I am your host, Angela Joyner, and I'm glad to see everyone gathering in the Pal Talk chat room. That's always fun. And you can go to the UFO Paranormal Radio Network and download the information for the Pal Talk virtual auditorium. It's free, and looks like we got about 40 people there now. I know a lot of you have been waiting for another Oregon report from Frank Warren. He's been with Bob in Oregon all this week, and he's on his way home tonight. He's going to be writing some reports, kind of getting his thoughts together, and he will be with us next week, hopefully in the second hour. The first hour is going to be devoted to investigative journalist Leslie Kane discussing her new book that you just heard Peter Robbins talk about on Karen Dolan's show just a few minutes ago. But tonight's guest is Gary Beckom, and one that I've had scheduled 2 or 3 times, but for one reason or another, one of us couldn't make it. So I'm real excited to get with Gary tonight. He's an independent journalist and web author and researcher of material that blurs the distinction between fiction and reality. Beckom provided behind-the-scenes information to British author Nick Cook, the former aviation editor and aerospace consultant for Jane's Defense Weekly, for Cook's book, The Hunt for Zero Point. Beckom later wrote a follow-up to Cook's book called Dark Matters Surround Dark Energy. A Russian online newspaper published the article as American military is pursuing new types of exotic weapons. In 2004, Beckom initiated Starstream Research as an informal survey of exotic physics and consciousness concepts related to the survival or otherwise of the human race. The Starstream material appears as the Space-Time Threat Assessment Report, or STAR Report, to examine topics considered off-limits by other organizations. Beckham's articles have been picked up and republished online at numerous websites. In 2007, Starstream Research launched a website for the general public. Starpod.org features popular articles on subjects ranging from the use of paranormal phenomena by the intelligence community to government concerns about extraterrestrial threats and beyond. Welcome to the Joyner Report, Gary. So glad we were finally able to hook up.
Hi, Angela. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a little tough here lately to try to connect, but we finally made it.
Well, I know when we had scheduled this back in January, you were sick, and then I got sick, and finally maybe we're both back health-wise.
Well, I'm feeling a lot better now, so I don't always do so well in the wintertime. I have sinus infections and things like that hit me sometimes, but I'm doing better this summer. So.
And just for those who may not know, Gary and I both have boards on Open Minds Forum. If anybody is interested in going there and having a look, it's a friendly kind of place where you're sure to be welcomed. And Gary does a lot of writing and a lot of research. And what have you been looking at lately, Gary?
Well, I guess lately I've been just kind of reviewing a lot of older material and kind of looking back at a lot of the research that I did initially goes way back into the 1990s. And so I've been slowly reviewing some of those things and a lot of the email conversations that were going on at the time. And topics ranging from, new technologies to UFO disclosure and beyond that. And just kind of reviewing and kind of catching up on little details I might have missed the first time around.
All right. I know that you wrote an article recently that caught my attention, and it's regarding the MOD releasing more documents. And I know we talked earlier, and you said that you really hadn't been able to read them yet, but you did write something, and you tied it to 911, the Robinson psychic that predicted something like that would happen. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, there's a gentleman named Chris Robinson who's, I guess, pretty well known in the UK. And for like about 20 years, he's been passing off various insights that he has into terror attacks, primarily, and working with authorities to kind of warn them ahead of time that something's going to happen. And it turns out that in this new collection of UFO documents from the UK, that there's actually reports in there where there were inquiries about Chris Robinson and his appearance at a RAF base where he had come in to warn them about an imminent terror attack. And apparently this attack actually did take place a few weeks after he showed up. And we also know, and Chris has been on the record about this, he's done a lot of interviews on television, and he's talked about his 9/11 predictions. But what he's also shared with me is the fact that he actually warned the American CIA about 9/11 before it took place.
And is there anything to back him up?
Well, it's kind of hearsay. He's provided details that I've been able to track back to certain sources where I can't get 100% confirmation, but there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that seem to fit what he's saying. And if you're familiar with Dan Smith, who is also at the Open Minds Forum, Dan has been of the opinion for quite a long time that there was some pre-knowledge that the 9/11 attacks were going to take place. And Dan was so convinced of this because of his contact with his friend Ron, who is from the CIA, that he actually went to the FBI, and he reported, I think within a week after 9/11, he reported to the FBI that Ron had seemed to have prior knowledge of the 9/11 attacks.
And in case someone listening doesn't know, when you talk about Dan Smith's friend, Ron Pandolfi, Pandolfi is supposed to be, I don't know if he still is, or at one time he was supposed to run the Weird Desk at the CIA. Is that right?
Well, the rumor is that Ron took that over from Kit Green, who had been at the CIA and apparently had access to collections of files on things like UFOs and the paranormal. We know for sure that Kit had worked with the psychic research that CIA was doing back in the 1970s. You can find that information in CIA's Studies in Intelligence, which is their internal journal. It's partially classified. But parts of that have been declassified, and you can actually find references to Kit in there concerning the psychic research. Now, the story goes that after Kit left the CIA in 1985, Ron kind of took over that they call it the Weird Desk, but I don't really think it's an actual, desk. It's actually a collection of information on what is sometimes called the phenomenology problem, which is all the weird stuff that the government can't really explain. And so they have these files, reports of things, somewhat probably like the MOD files that were just released, but rumors go that the U.S. has actually more information than what we're seeing coming out from Great Britain.
Well, how do we know that Ron Pandolfi is actually in charge of that for the CIA? Do we really know it, or is it hearsay again?
Well, it's probably due to other individuals like Bruce Maccabee who've talked about Ron over the years, and Dan, of course, and Dan has tended to report his contacts with Ron and topics that they've discussed. As to how much involvement Ron really has or how much interest he really has in that topic, it's really hard to say. What we do know for sure is that Ron was reported by the New York Times to had been at CIA, that he was considered a senior analyst, and that he was looking at things like foreign technology, missiles in China, things like that. So we were pretty sure of who Ron was or what he was doing there, and in addition to that, recently Ron was in charge of a study that was released to the public on a fairly esoteric topic called high-frequency gravity waves. And that's somewhat related to some of the UFO technologies that we've heard about over the last 10 years, like anti-gravity devices and things like that. So, without getting too technical, it's basically the high-frequency gravity wave is kind of an extension of some of the same ideas that were floating around, like Podkletnov and his gravity force beam. Some of the anti-gravity research we know the Army was doing because it's in the public record.
Maybe you can explain something to me, because this is something I've really not understood, and you've been in this for so long, and you have such a grasp of all of the black ops and all of these things. But so maybe I can ask you a question and you can explain something to me.
Okay.
If Ron Pandolfi is who he says he is, and he is leaking this information constantly to Dan Smith or whoever, why isn't he in jail? Why don't they pick him up for treason or something? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I asked that same question, Angela. I actually asked the FBI, and they came back, and the answer came back to me from the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And basically they said, we really aren't comfortable discussing this. I was trying to just get some general information. What are the policies, if these people are talking to us on the Internet, they're discussing these topics with us, there must be some kind of guidance or policy. And you wouldn't really think that would be such a sensitive topic that they couldn't discuss it in email. But that was essentially the response I got, was we really don't feel comfortable discussing this topic. So it turns out that about the time all of this was going on, that our government was also getting involved on the Internet, and that they were using the Internet to collect intelligence. And that meant that they were getting on the Internet, they were creating personalities on the Internet more than likely, and they were interacting with people in order to collect information. Now, it's possible, and we have no way to prove this, but it's possible that the information that Ron provides to Dan is given to Dan knowing that Dan is going to blog about it. He's going to discuss it. He's going to pass it on to lists of people. Many of the people that are on those lists are either scientists or people involved with technology. They may be interested in UFOs, but they may actually have day jobs where they're working on other advanced technology, possibly even military contracts. So it's possible that some of this information is spread in order just to track the network. And Dan Smith has said that Ron has told him that since they can't track the actual phenomena, the UFO phenomena, the paranormal phenomena, is something they really can't track. So instead they track the people who are involved with it.
So he could just be a way, he provides the information and they just see where it goes on the Internet.
That's a possibility. I mean, when you put information on the Internet, it's accessible to anyone, anywhere. So, you can send information, you can send messages to the other side. You can see how that information spreads. You can see what kind of interest it generates, what kind of responses it generates. It's very useful to do that if you're in the intelligence business.
So is it possible that Pandolfi is just fed things and it's a disinformation campaign?
Well, it's possible, and it's also possible that he's just having a little fun on the side. I mean, we really don't know, how seriously he takes the topic, other than the fact that we have this high-frequency gravity wave study, which he's responsible for. He's identified as the responsible party, and a lot of the people that were involved in these discussions in the Internet are also cited in that study. So that right there tells me that there's at least some seriousness behind this.
Have you ever talked to him yourself?
I have not. I have exchanged messages with Ron Pandolfi by email, but I have not personally talked to him on the phone.
Have you tried to?
I have not pursued it directly, no. I have talked to Kid Green. I've talked to a few other people, but not to Ron.
Well, what did Kit Green tell you? Did he say that he was the one that ran the weird desk, or whatever we should be calling it? I don't know, the file where nobody knows what to do with it. That's where it goes.
Well, the weird desk, again, I think that's more of a metaphor than an actual, place at the CIA. But there are files that have been released. The government has been forcing declassification, so a lot of files have come out. The biggest collection of paranormal files is the Stargate collection, and that's all of the research that they were doing on psychic phenomena over about a 30-year period.
Did you get that information from Kit Green?
No, I have that. Actually, the CIA officially released those files. In 2004, there was a very large release of about 89,000 pages, and then they've been trickling out a little bit since then. But
well, you did say that you did speak with Kit Green, was there anything that he said that was enlightening?
There was some information that was somewhat tantalizing. It wasn't necessarily very specific information. What happened was, if we go back to about 2006, there was an internet discussion going on, and Kit had piped in about discussions at a committee where he had been, where they were discussing and some of that zero-point energy and things like that. And he mentioned that, and when I tried to pursue it with him, then they kind of tried to back off the fact that was discussed at all. So whether, and this was a committee that's actually designated by the Defense Intelligence Agency to provide analysis, basically, of threats, potential threats, future threats from advanced technologies that we haven't foreseen yet. So it would make sense that even if this was just kind of discussions going on the side, not official discussions, that scientists there might have had some interest in it and may have been talking about the topics like zero-point energy, anti-gravity, things like that.
Okay. Who do you think is the key intelligence agency in charge of collecting the UFO ET information?
Well, if you do a little research, it seems like none of the agencies really, and this is kind of a problem in general, that there's a disconnect between a lot of the agencies, and there's a lot of competition between them. And even going back to 9/11, there was information CIA did not share with FBI simply because they wanted to keep it to themselves, because if they had operations in place, and they did not want to jeopardize those operations by sharing the information with another government agency. So when you get into something as serious as some of these advanced technologies might be, or the possibility of visitors from other planets, you have to believe that information is compartmented so heavily that only a handful of people will have knowledge of it, and it will be extremely controlled information. It's not something like right now we're seeing these top secret documents that are being released by WikiLeaks. It's not going to be something like that. This is going to be information that's going to be held within a small group of people, maybe less than a dozen people, maybe 6 people are going to be involved in one of the compartmented programs and actually have access to some of the key information. And do
you think they're spread throughout the government agencies, the 6, 7, 8, 10 people? Are they spread in different agencies? Are they all in one agency? Where do you think they are?
Well, if it's a compartmented program, it's going to depend on who's given access to the program and how much access they're actually allowed. But, I would guess that they're going to have maybe little tiny groups of people that are maybe, in an organization at some very deep level. And then there'll be other people that will have access to maybe the knowledge that group exists, but they won't necessarily have access to the actual information.
So is it one of those things where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question. They do this for a reason. They do this to prevent the other side from getting the information. And they have to compartment it in order to protect it. And again, with something like WikiLeaks, where you have top secret documents that were obviously accessible to a lot of people, that information leaked out and got posted on the internet. To protect this kind of information, they have to have a very small group of people that they can trust, that they're going to allow to have the information, and they're going to break it apart into little pieces so that no one has all the information.
Do you think Pandolfi's one of those people?
It's hard. It's really hard to say. Pandolfi is probably probing as much as anyone. And one of the things I did learn from Kit when I talked to Kit was the idea that it's not the intelligence community like the CIA or even the DIA perhaps, but has the information. The information, if there's a reverse engineering, if there's some of this high technology that's taking place, it's probably compartmented very deeply in the military establishment, and it may even be privatized. And in other words, the CIA may not, the people at the CIA may actually be asking the same questions we are. They may be looking for the information. And people like Pandolfi and Kit Green may actually be just, in the same position we are, other than the fact that they have a little bit better access. They're still asking the same questions we are about what's going on.
Well, I interviewed Stephen Greer back during the fall, and I'm sure listeners know that he claims that he has provided briefing material for President Obama, not through the front door, but through the back door, and he's talked about it a lot. Who would contact Greer to do that?
My understanding is Greer has had meetings with Pandolfi, but I don't know the details.
Do you think that's true?
I have no reason to. I think that was Dan Smith. I think provided that information. May have even been present. I'm not sure about that. I guess I'd have to check with Dan. But as far as what Greer's actually doing, we really don't know. I mean, he might provide briefing material, but where that material goes is hard to say.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because, really, if any one of us wanted to, we could write a report, do a briefing report, and we could send it either through someone we knew at the White House or however, but we wouldn't really know if Obama really got it or read it.
Well, exactly, and that's there's a lot of these rumors that go around because you hear about meetings, you hear about the Arlington Institute, for example, and we hear a lot of stories about the Arlington Institute. John L. Peterson, it's his think tank, and they look at the future and they try to come up with ways of predicting future trends, and they have a lot of meetings, formal I think and informal meetings there, and a lot of big names get passed around. The former director of the Central Intelligence Agency was, I think, originally listed as a member of the Arlington Institute. So they have these meetings, and you hear stories, you hear rumors. I think it was Catherine Austin Fitz, I believe it was, that said that there was discussions about the alien presence on the Earth, and that there were members of the Navy present, and I think James Woolsey was there allegedly, and we really don't know exactly what's being discussed or at what level it's being discussed, if it's speculative or if there's something more serious involved there. But we can go back to looking at what the government's been involved in the past, like the Stargate files. And we know for a fact that the government does pursue these kind of odd reports, and that they pursue them fairly seriously. And they did for about 30 years with the psychic stuff.
Well, how important are the Stargate reports?
Well, what the Stargate reports tell us is really that the psychic stuff goes back to probably to the 1950s. And in the 1960s, it was Richard Helms, who was eventually the director of Central Intelligence, who was interested in the paranormal phenomena. There were reports coming out of the Soviet Union that they were using hypnosis and psychic powers, and he suggested that they try to make that kind of phenomena operational for American intelligence. So they were pursuing it for quite a long time. And then in the 1970s, everything kind of switched over to the idea of using this remote viewing, the idea of using the human mind to perceive locations that are distant in space and time and gather information. And so they did pursue that for about 20 years. And then in 1995, the CIA basically was handed control of those programs by Congress. Congress ordered that the CIA take it over from the military intelligence, from the Defense Intelligence Agency. So the CIA got involved again and took it over, and then they shut it down. They just closed it in 1995.
Well, are there still more of those files to be released, or are they all out now?
No, the 89,000 pages was about 2/3 of the files. They've had a few additional ones come out, but that means there's probably about 30,000 or more pages still classified from Stargate. Now, some of the reason for keeping the pages classified is because they were doing psychic operations against drug operations, and they were doing psychic operations on intelligence targets, and some of that information was combined with normal sources that might have been human sources on the ground. So there's probably information in those files that has to remain classified just to protect the sources.
How long?
Well, probably for quite a while.
And is this information what led to the Men Who Stare at Goats book, and is that where this came from or not?
Well, okay, the Men Who Stare at Goats, John Ronson was actually, he started to research this material a few years after I was looking at it. And he started asking, who is behind this, or who should I look up to determine who's behind this, the rumors that there was a new psychic program. And so he met with Uri Geller in London right after 9/11. And according to Ronson in his book, Uri Geller said, I've been reactivated, meaning that he'd been brought back to the CIA to be a psychic spy. And he told him, so I can't talk about this stuff. And John Ronson pushed him on it a little bit and eventually said, okay, I'll tell you one thing. The guy who reactivated me, his name is Ron. And that's all he would tell him. So John Ronson went off and tried to track down Ron, but then he kind of got sidetracked into another whole area here by some of the former psychic spies. And that's really where the Men Who Stare at Goats book went. It really went off in a different direction. It started with the search for Ron, and then it went off somewhere else.
And I read on your website today, actually, and I don't get to look around as much as I'd like to sometimes, that Ron Pandolfi is supposed to be the White House hamster guy. Isn't that right?
Well, yeah, that's kind of fun. That was kind of a funny story because about a year ago, Dan Smith was talking about Ron and about the fact that he thought Ron was working out of the White House. And he decided he wanted to really force Ron to come out and disclose more information. So he was going to go to the White House gate and demand to see Ron Pandolfi, expecting that he probably would be arrested or something for, disorderly conduct at the time. So I thought, well, Dan, this doesn't sound like a really good idea. So I emailed Ron. I said, Ron, did you know that Dan is, well, first of all, Dan's been talking about hamsters. And he said that you told him he needed to research hamsters. And then he said he's going to go to the White House gate and he's going to ask for you and he's going to demand to see you. So I said, so Ron, you should probably talk to Dan because that doesn't sound like a very good idea. And Ron came back and said something about, well, Dan knows I am the White House hamster guy. and what I had thought at the time was, well, we knew that Ron had changed jobs from, he had done that high frequency gravity wave study, and that was with the a kind of intelligence that's called measurement and signature intelligence. And it's kind of a technical kind of intelligence where they look at ways of detecting, maybe detecting unidentified objects perhaps. But he had moved from that. We didn't know exactly where he went. So Dan had been under the understanding that he was working out of the old, I think it's the Eisenhower building across the street from the White House. And anyway, so Ron came back, and I think he was kind of joking about the hamsters, but I thought about it a little bit because Dan had mentioned that Ron only worked with a special kind of hamster called an Afghan hamster, which is sometimes called the mouse-like hamster. And at the time, I thought, well, I wonder if Ron is doing something, involving our Afghan conflict. And I know that they've been experimenting with the use of animals, and one of the things they're trying to do is find ways of detecting improvised explosive devices. And so I just speculated maybe that's what the hamsters were all about. Maybe they're trying to breed hamsters to detect explosives. But in any case, Ron joked and said that Dan had probably decided that the hamsters were aliens, and so I wrote a little, story about it, and I thought it was kind of funny because John Ronson had also talked about a guy named Guy Savelli who allegedly used his mind not to kill goats, but to kill hamster, or basically kill his pet hamster. So I kind of combined the two ideas into a story. And I kind of, at that point, I felt that Ron really had run his course. We kind of knew that Ron was behind the scenes alive. And we knew that he had a kind of a sense of humor, and that he also fed Dan a lot of information, and that inside of that information there was stuff that could be confirmed, like the high-frequency gravity wave study. I knew about that a year before it was published because Dan had blogged about it. So there was information coming out through Dan that later on I could go back and confirm. And
so at least some of it is the truth.
Exactly. And the question, of course, then is, well, why does Ron leak this information to Dan? What is the purpose behind that?
And it's rumored, or is it proven? I'm not sure, that Dan Smith is supposed to be a friend of the Bush family somehow.
Yeah, well, and again, someone probably needs to really track some of this down and really confirm it, get a solid connection there. But allegedly, Dan's family is allegedly, they go way back. They started, I think it was Caltech. I might be wrong on that, but I think they had something to do with the funding of the original institution that became Caltech, and then eventually, Dan's family had, friend. I think it was his older sister was a friend of President Bush, the first President Bush. His sister, Nancy Ellis Bush, and Dan even talks about times where he'd been to their house, and I think he said he was there when they learned of the Iraq invasion, the first invasion into Kuwait. But the story goes that Dan has all these connections through his family, and that's possibly part of the reason why Ron has taken an interest in him as well.
Well, I've always wondered because the UFO community puts so much into Ron Pandolfi, and everybody's always looking, to see about him. I know Grant Cameron contacted me one time and said, "Have you ever seen a picture of this guy?" And, well, no, I hadn't. I started looking. I did find one, and I think it was on John Alexander's wife's blog, and that was pretty recent. And then, but the UFO community puts a lot of stock in stories and people that really can't be verified. And I think it takes people like you that pull out the little pieces and kind of connect the dots to, to see what is really the truth and what could be disinformation, which is a time-consuming process. And so, I really admire what you do.
Well, thank you, Angela. The thing that I try to do is and it's one of the reasons why I say I'm working the edge of reality and fiction, because that's really what disinformation is. It's fiction posing as reality, and that's really what this entire space of ideas is about. We have so much going on there that we can't confirm, and there's so many tantalizing hints of things that might be, but we really don't know for sure. And so I feel like I'm working this kind of zone between reality and fiction. And in the process of doing it, sometimes things come out of it, like learning about the high frequency gravity wave study before it was published. So there are some things in there that we can confirm. Another thing I found, going back a few years ago, was doing some digging through government documents, and I happened upon a budget document that was kind of buried. It was in way deep in this budget document, and it was about anti-gravity research. And it was an actual Army contract for about $500,000 to research an idea of a physicist named Dr. Ning Li, who had an idea that she would be able to create an anti-gravity device. And if you read the actual budget document, what's really interesting is that it gives you an idea of the kind of dreams that the military has for technology that they'd like to be able to create someday. You know, they talk about knocking missiles out of the sky with it, or making heavy vehicles like Army tanks weigh less so they can move them more efficiently. You know, and that's actually right in the actual budget proposal. So
well, is that something that was included in Cook's book?
No, actually, I found this after Cook's book was published. I put it in the. It's actually in the beginning of my book. It's right at the very beginning. But you know, they kind of, if you read it, it doesn't sound like anything until you get into it. You know, it's called the Gravito-Electromagnetic Superconductivity Experiment. And then you get into the description of it, and they start talking about the payoffs, which would include generating gravitational forces artificially for propulsion, controlling missiles, lowering the weight of tanks, deflecting or countering guidance systems of missiles, and so forth. So there's proof out there that they are really looking at this stuff. And this particular document, I think, only ended up being published because they tried to short-circuit to get it up to speed quickly. They didn't use the standard method of arranging the contract.
Right.
But I'm sure this is the tip of the iceberg. This is the stuff that we're finding in the white world, in the open source material. So you can imagine what's probably really going on in the black budget.
Well, so what have you concluded in your hunt for 0 point? Does the government possess the technology or not, or what do you think?
Well, using more what I would call unconventional methods of trying to intuitively determine what's going on. I think the big push in the next decade or so is probably going to be playing around with this quantum teleportation, and which is something IBM actually came up with back about I guess now it's been almost 20 years.
What is quantum teleportation?
Well, it's something IBM figured out that they figured out that you could teleport information. You could under certain circumstances you can reproduce the state of a quantum particle somewhere else. But it does require, you can't go faster than light. There are these limitations to it. It doesn't do everything you see in science fiction movies, and it's really mostly for moving information. It would be something that would be very useful maybe in a future computer system. But now, I predicted about 10 years ago that there's a guy at MIT, his name is Seth Lloyd, he's a professor there, and I based on the research I was looking at, I predicted that he was going to eventually start working on gravity. Now, he wasn't working on gravity back then, to my knowledge, but he does now. He is now starting to work on gravity, what's called quantum gravity, which is a real problem for physics. And he's also working on, recently he's been doing some papers about using teleportation as this quantum teleportation for time machines. Now, these are, from the point of view of the mainstream physics community, this is really speculative. This is not, this is not hard technology at all. It's really they're just beginning to look at the theory, some of the ideas, and they're playing with ideas. But I predicted that some of these ideas are eventually going to make their way into, I think, actual technology, possibly being developed in the black world at some point.
There was just a Washington Post article. What was it? I know you're going to know about, I guess it was last week sometime, and it came out talking about all the black ops in the military, and this number really jumped out at me. It was like, black ops in the government, but it was like 300 and something thousand people have top secret clearance. Do you know the article I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think that's you're probably referring to the Top Secret America article, I think that was in the Washington Post, where they exposed all of the private contracting that was going on in the intelligence community.
And I was going, I had no idea it would be that many people. I mean, to me, that's not very secret.
Well, that's when I talk about this what they call compartmentalization. What they do is top secret is just one of three possible classifications for information, but that's not it. It goes beyond that. You can take that top secret information and you can make it special compartmented information that's only accessible to a limited number of people. So you could be the admiral running the Defense Intelligence Agency and possibly not have access to specially compartmented information, because you have to also have, in addition to your clearance, you have to have need to know on the information. So if you don't have need to know, you're not going to have access to it. Now, Edgar Mitchell at one point mentioned that he had approached someone, I think at the DIA, I believe it was probably the director of the DIA, on some of the information that he had on the UFO topic and things that he had heard. And allegedly, according to Edgar Mitchell, when this gentleman looked into it, he was basically given that story that this is okay. There are these programs. They are at a level of where they basically do is they say we can neither confirm nor deny the information. It's so secret that we cannot tell you if it exists or if it doesn't exist. We simply cannot comment on it at all.
And so what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that, well, see, if you admit that the program exists but it's classified, then you've revealed the program. So what it means is there are programs that are so secret that the government holds so tightly as a secret that they cannot let anyone know that they exist. And the only way they can do that is to just simply not talk about them. So when they get a Freedom of Information request on a particular topic, like Lee Graham, for example, requested information on some UFO detections by some of our space satellites. The Air Force came back and said we can neither confirm nor deny these detections. We simply cannot acknowledge whether they did or did not happen. So that tells you that you're reaching that point. That's how you know you're beginning to enter that world, that black world where things are really hidden. When you
I really don't know how you stick with it, because it's very frustrating to me. I just want to go throw your hands up and go, okay, nobody's going to say anything. It's all a big runaround, and you have supposedly government people that are putting out information that's not true, while in the context of the not true, there is just a little tiny bit that is true. That it just seems like, to me, you just get so bogged down, but you overcome that somehow.
Well, the only way you can really penetrate, I don't try to penetrate into classified programs. That's not my intention. And I look at the open source material, and then I speculate, because that's really the best we can do. We can look at the historical record. We can see what did they do in the past, how was it done, how does that relate to things that are going on today. And we can look at, we can interview sources. We've got sources that are, called on background or deep background sources. People that'll tell you, here's what I heard, or this is what I think, but you can't quote me. Don't repeat what I told you. So you've got kind of a combination of the historical record and then these deep background sources, and you can kind of take that and then you can speculate further out and go, well, based on what I heard, based on what I've read, happened in the past, this is kind of what I think might be going on. And that's really the best that we can do, because we don't want to damage national security. And that's something that we're seeing happen with the WikiLeaks situation. We're seeing where individuals are being put at risk by the release of these documents.
Now, do you really think those documents put people at risk? Because a lot of that stuff that I've read on WikiLeaks, I'm like, well, why was this classified to start with?
If you look at classified documents, you're going to go, why was any of this even considered confidential, let alone secret? And the truth is there's a principle called the mosaic principle, where you can take bits and pieces of multiple documents, little things that are left in, and then you can use them to reproduce the puzzle. You can literally extract information that's secret information from bits and pieces of non-secret information, from open sources and from information released in some of these documents. And you can go back and you can take dozens of documents and maybe determine who the person was who was the source behind all that information, and then target that source. So that's where they're putting people at a risk. And so again, my entire purpose here is not to try to penetrate into that secret information. What we really need is we need some kind of a political will to tell the government that there's got to be certain limits on this. It's happened over time that they've, with the Freedom of Information Act, some of the presidential requests that have gone through to allow information to come out after, say, 25 years or so. But they're still blacking a lot of that out. They're still redacting a lot of it. And the reason they do that is because not only can it reveal sources, but they're even more sensitive than revealing a source is revealing a method, something the government is still doing, but they don't want to reveal to the enemy.
Right.
So there are very serious reasons for what they do when it comes to classified information. Now, a lot of the stuff that doesn't look like it should be classified probably doesn't need to be, but they process so much information through the government that they can't take the chance. So if it's a maybe situation, they're just going to classify it regardless. It's just got to be classified.
Well, listen, do you think there is any U.S. president that has really been in the loop about UFOs, the UFO phenomenon, ET technology? I mean, all the way back to Eisenhower, was he in the loop, or are there any modern presidents that you think really know what's going on?
Well, Gus Russo did an article. Actually, he was commissioned by Dan Smith to do this article. And he did interview, in the process of doing the article back about 3 years ago, he did interview people like Ron Pandolfi and Kit Green and a few other people from the Defense Intelligence Agency and Air Force. And from all of that information, he kind of concluded that some of those sources are just as much in the dark as we are, but they may have had friends, people in high places who hinted that there's more to the story. Now, according to the rumor, and this again is not confirmed, the rumor is that one of those gentlemen, one of those intelligence officials that Russo interviewed, was speaking with U.S. presidents. That was part of his job. And that the topic of UFOs would come up. And he'd never specified whether he brought it up or if they brought it up, but somehow the UFO topic would come up. And it was at least discussed. But apparently, Russo concluded that even the presidents don't have a need to know. So ultimately, if there's something to this, it may very well be the case that the president doesn't know about it.
Yeah. Well,
he may know a title of a program, or he may hear something about, he may hear rumors, but none of the details. That stuff's compartmented. That stuff is classified.
Well, in the MOD releases, that Churchill and Eisenhower were rumored to have this agreement not to release anything about UFOs in World War II. It might create mass panic. And supposedly it is the grandson of a bodyguard of Churchill's, I think, that said this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. We know that there were these sightings of things like the so-called Foo Fighters and some of these phenomena. And there were other documents released, I think, a few years ago by the MOD where they talked about some of the science behind, or the speculative science behind some of the sightings. And, they discussed things like plasma balls, kind of like ball lightning, those kind of phenomena, which are still unexplained. But they were speculating that maybe some of that was what they were seeing. But we know at least that whatever was going on was serious enough that they were looking into the cause behind it or trying to understand it.
Right.
And they were also looking at the Russians and what the Russians were researching. And the Russians were very heavily into some very odd phenomena and some odd theories and ideas. So there's no question in my mind that was going on. Now, you talked about the disinformation.
Right.
And we don't know how much of that information that we're finding in these files was maybe put out as disinformation. It's possible that the Russians were trying to spoof us. We were spoofing them. We might have been spoofing ourselves in cases where, one agency might produce a document, maybe like allegedly the MJ-12 documents, which are supposed to be fakes. Maybe one of our own agencies created that series of documents. Maybe there was a purpose behind it for some kind of an operation, and somehow it got out into the public domain. And of course, they had to deny everything on it and get the FBI to, also deny it. And now we're in the situation where nobody really wants to admit to what was going on. And this is the core problem we have with our government is finding a balance between the public's right to know, the public's need to know, and the government's need for secrecy. And the problem is when you have that secrecy so tightly compartmented that abuse, the possibility of abuse is there. It's always there, and it could be happening all the time, and we simply wouldn't know about it.
Right. How important do you think Bigelow is in the UFO world?
Bob Bigelow seems to be pretty seriously involved in as far as the UFO world, he's obviously funded, things like NIDS and some research. He's funded individual researchers, I believe. So he's important on that side of it. But right now, he's really pushing the space the inflatable space enclosures that they're putting up in orbit. So he's on that leading cutting edge of the privatization of space. So putting up sometimes they're referred to as space hotels. I think that's really probably the future of the space industry at this point. And especially now with the government cutting back on NASA and some of our programs to go back to the moon, for example, putting Mars way out, so far out that we don't know if it'll ever happen. Meanwhile, there are all these private companies that are researching new kinds of propulsion systems, trying to find ways of making it more cost-effective to travel into space. And hopefully that'll eventually take us back out to Mars or to the moon, I should say, and eventually to Mars. And
well, he was quoted in an article recently as saying something about, UFOs have killed people. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, he was, I think, being interviewed for I believe it was the New York Times.
Yeah, I think it was.
He made a statement to the effect that people have died. Now, he wasn't specific about how they died. We don't know. Maybe he was referring to, you hear stories of the pilots that try to follow the UFO and their airplanes go too high and then they crash. But
I know it was like the writer of that article just bypassed that. I would have been going, what? What'd you say? When? Who? Where? What? How?
Exactly. It's kind of funny. He didn't pursue it at all. But what we know is that there's stories about the ranch out in Utah, and George Knapp, I believe, and Cole McKellar wrote that book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, about that. Now, there was information that I got from Eric Davis, who was one of the scientists with NIDS, and he works with Hal Puthoff. And he provided additional details for me that weren't in the book. Mostly about
okay. Wait a second, Gary. I just noticed I'm getting these warnings that we're at the top of the hour. We need to take a break. Can you take about an 8-minute break and come back for about another 30 minutes?
Sure.
We've got a lot of questions in the chat room I'm seeing now, and looks like we've got a lot of people really interested. Will that work for you?
That'd be just fine.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. We're going to have about an 8-minute break, And then we'll be back and we will learn more from Gary Beckom. Thank you.
The Church of Emmaus with hosts Jeffrey Pritchett and Guy Weddle. 10 p.m. Central Saturdays. Opening the gates of the underworld and calling down beings of ancient starlight. Tune in, Mosh for the Apocalypse on the Paranormal Radio Network. Come to our forum at mavisincarnate.com.
Light up your night with The Kevin Smith Show. Hi, this is Kevin Smith. Join me Monday through Friday right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Do you like to ask questions about everything? Would you like to escape from your proverbial box? Just leap out and explore our world in ways you've never imagined? You can have that opportunity. As we grow and expand, new features will be added, allowing you to experience radio programming at a fresh new level. I invite you to join me, November Hansen, host of Voice of the People. Together, we can expand our horizons and peer into multifaceted possibilities. This program will broadcast live Saturday evenings on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Are you interested in a radio program that focuses on the deeper aspects of the UFO topic? Would you like to explore the facts and truths of what ufology and UFO research are all about? Then, join us here every Saturday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network for Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis, with your host, G. Andrew.
Hey! Hi there. Got your attention? I'm Gia Scott, and I was curious what you were doing from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays. See, I host this really interesting little radio program that airs live then, and we bring in all sorts of guests. Authors, experiencers, and everything in between. It's paranormal and guaranteed to make you go, My guest list is always up at www.giascott.com, and do tune in to the Dawn of Shades from 7 to 9 p.m. on Tuesdays.
Hi, this is Rob Simone, and I want to tell you about my brand new show here on the Paranormal Radio Network. Each week, I bring you the most interesting people on the planet, the most in-depth discussions, and the most controversial issues. We'll go where no talk show dares to go. Join me every week for the Rob Simone Talk Show here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
A radio program that looks at the UFO topic from a fresh perspective. Sound interesting? Then join us here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network every Friday evening at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central for The Joyner Report, hosted by journalist and researcher Angela Joyner.
Are you a fan of the unknown? Do you constantly watch the sky, wondering if there's something out there, in fear of things going bump in the night?
Whispers Radio brings you headfirst into the world of the paranormal with the latest news and interviews with the paranormal elite.
With hosts Jordan Klein and Nick Queen, you are sure to be consumed in the world of ghosts, UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracy theories, and the unknown.
So check out Whispers Radio every Tuesday night, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 to 7 Central. And give us a call, 1-866-514-1600.
Visit us at www.whispersradio.com.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Good evening and welcome to this week's worldwide broadcast of The Joyner Report. Now here's your host, Angela Joyner.
And it looks questions. And so we're going to stay for a little while longer and see if we can give you some insight into these questions. I'm talking about the people in the Pal Talk virtual auditorium. Gary, are you there?
I'm here, Angela.
All right. One of the questions that I'm seeing here is people have really followed the Clay and Sean Pickering Source A story it's been going on for 2 years, and then they want to know what.
Angela, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You kind of faded out there for a moment.
Okay, sorry. They want to know what you think of the Clay and Sean Pickering Source A story where Richard Tillman has recently been outed. What's your insight on that?
Well, to be honest, I really never followed it originally. I became interested in it when it sounded like that there had been this meeting with Bruce Maccabee on the naval base, and I was curious as to how Mr. Thielman got onto the base. I don't know if that's really been resolved yet at this point, so I'm not really sure if I should comment any further on it. Apparently it is under official investigation, according to the sources over at Reality Uncovered. But I was kind of interested in the idea that even if this had been a hoax, if the entire thing had been hoaxed, the idea of using something similar to penetrate into a military base, to actually develop the idea as a kind of a method for collecting intelligence. But at this point, I really don't know if I should go and speak any further on that. I just really haven't followed it in enough detail.
Well, I have talked a little bit with Bruce Maccabee about how that guy got onto the base. Mm-hmm. And, he said that this is my understanding, the way it was presented to him, the guy was in the Navy, and that really wasn't his job to figure out if he was or not. His job was listen to him about his story, and that he didn't, really try to verify that. But even so, you would think since 911, but before that, really, before 911, if you don't have the credentials, you shouldn't be able to get on a base. But it's kind of all dependent on the guard that was working that day, isn't it?
Yeah, my understanding is he'd have to present some kind of an access card or have someone on the base, arrange for him to visit and have a visitor's badge to get in. But in any case, the idea that you could do this, that you could just create an identity, you could meet with all these former Navy guys and then get onto a base and elicit information that's something that might be useful to an intelligence service if they wanted to penetrate into a base or get information. So. But at this point, I think I'll just I'm not really going to comment any further because I really don't know, other than the fact that there's supposed to be official investigations going on.
All right, that's fair enough. And yeah, we know the FBI is supposed to be looking into the what do you call that? Stolen valor aspect of it. And I don't know if we'll really ever see it go anywhere, but I don't, I was invited to New York to interview Source A. I didn't go. Maybe I should have. But really, I think I'm glad I didn't. It's so convoluted, and I just, was like, okay. And I think Clay Pickering, I've talked to him on the phone several times. I think he's a really nice guy. He's been exceptionally nice to me. And, I don't have a problem with that. And, was he duped? I've been trying to figure that out, too. But, okay, let's go on to the next question here. you know Jake Reason from Open Minds Forum, and he has followed the Laura Eisenhower story for quite a long time. And when that first broke, you and I were sending emails back and forth about that. I even ended up talking to her ex-boyfriend. What can you tell us about your conclusions on that story?
Well, that's another one of these kind of ambiguous stories where it could go any direction. But what was interesting to me was the fact that I came across, I can't recall, someone forwarded me the story about Laura and the Mars base and all, a lot of the really far out stuff. I think it was Alfred Weber, I believe, had written an article. And I immediately recognized little bits and pieces in that story that I looked at it and I said, I know this story from somewhere. This is familiar to me. And I was able to go back to my files from about 4 years ago, and I had a collection of files that really had just been sitting around because I didn't feel that they were, useful to create an article. And I was able to go back to them and then find these details that related to Laura's story that she had been telling Alfred. It was Laura, and I believe her friend, I think her name was Ivy Lynn. And they had come out with a story about this person that we'll just refer to, you mentioned her boyfriend, but we'll refer to him as Agent X, because that's how Laura originally referred to him, so we don't have to bring up his name or anything. And what I knew from Agent X, I had spoken to Agent X on the telephone several times in 2006. And there had been some information, kind of offered or dangled out there to me from Agent X, but nothing that I had actually pursued. And I did know from materials that he had sent me and from some of the other things I had read that he was interested in Mars. He was interested in missions to Mars. Some of his documents mentioned the year 2012 as a kind of a goal or a date that they wanted to go to Mars. So there were all these elements that were in Laura's story that I had already seen before. And then there was another person who allegedly had been working for Agent X briefly, who had allegedly had a proposal for a science fiction story. And there were elements in that story that also showed up in Laura's story. So the whole thing was somewhat curious to me, how these people had concocted this idea, of this Mars mission and these Mars bases. And then once Laura had taken that story to Alfred, then it got connected to other farther out stories, and they were talking about teleportation and time travel and things right out of science fiction. So, but there was kind of a core reality. There was this core base reality that I knew existed, which was the idea of pursuing the nuclear rocket technology for deep space missions, deep interplanetary space missions. And that's a real technology that's really being proposed and discussed, and there are people trying to raise funding to develop the technology.
So you heard parts of the story that rang true to you, and then when I talked to Agent X, is that what we said we call him?
Let's refer to him as Agent X.
Yeah, Agent X. He told me that they had little sex games that they played, and that it was kind of a role-playing thing that she took to an extreme. So, he didn't feel that she was exactly stable, and then that really sent up a red flag to me. That kind of concerned me. Okay, I don't want to hurt somebody that might be in some kind of a unstable position. I would never want to do that. But you didn't really feel that was the case, right?
Well, there's a lot of belief systems involved in it, as I'm sure you've discovered if you've done, as you've been exploring the UFO community and the paranormal community. So you deal with a lot of personal belief systems, and they sometimes border on religious, beliefs. And And when you combine that with technology, which is happening because of the internet and because of this free flow of information, you get these kind of hybrid ideas that, the gods from space and things like that, that come into being from all these different ideas flowing back and forth. But there's a core part of this that was actually taken, as far as I could tell, taken somewhat seriously. Laura mentioned the deer mutilation, for example. Now, I know that was discussed among certain people, including someone who had worked in the intelligence community. So I know that was taken seriously, at least to the point of discussion, where it was being discussed on a serious level. So there were these pieces of Laura's story that I felt were based in what I would call ground truth. We don't know really what they mean. We don't really know the reality behind them, but we know that it wasn't something that Laura just invented. It wasn't something she had just made up in her mind. There was more to the story. It wasn't just a fantasy that she had created. And the idea of this Mars mission, it seemed to me, was kind of inspired by the idea that there was this 2012 idea going around that the world's going to come to an end or something catastrophic is going to happen in 2012, and that there's probably a lot of people who would like to avoid that and might want to actually get off the planet and go somewhere else to, whether it's into one of Bob Bigelow's space hotels or, a mission to Mars, a Mars colony. So I think these ideas are all tied together in that sense, that there's this feeling or need to escape. And Laura basically claims that she was offered this role, this position to be among the members of some group that were going to escape. And this actually was in the storyline of Agent X's former employee's science fiction story, this whole escape into space. So all of these ideas had come together in kind of a strange way. But behind all of that, there's this reality of, if we're going to go to Mars, we're going to need probably these nuclear rockets, and Agent X does have connections to people who are working on these ideas. Agent X did go to the Puthoff Institute to visit Hal Puthoff. We know that for a fact because my associate Karen Anscombe was there when he met Hal at the Institute in Texas. So there were all these elements of reality underneath all of these other layers and layers of I suppose some people would call it fantasy, or science fiction, but underneath that there's all this core reality. So I was interested in how all of that was playing out and the reasons behind it. I understand,
Agent X doesn't deny meeting with Hal Puthoff, right? Because he was working for his parents' company at the time, and they were trying to get funding and all that, right?
There's some serious funding involved here, and there's energy technologies. Now, the thing I pointed out about Laura was that because of Laura's family, because she's an Eisenhower, her mother is very involved in energy for the Obama administration. And I had speculated. This goes back several months. I had speculated about the fact that connection is important. Whether or not there was anything going on, that's an important connection because Laura introduced Agent X to her mother, and her mother is on these commissions that are looking at future U.S. energy policy.
Right.
Now recently, in the last month, we had the story of the Russian spies. And what were they doing? They weren't, it wasn't James Bondish stuff. They were building social networks with people who were connected to people who have influence on U.S. policy. So there's a real purpose behind making some of these connections, because you want to learn what is the United States doing? Who are the people? Who are the players? And who's going to be directing the future of American energy policy? That's a big issue. And so Laura's mother is in that position, and the fact that Agent X, we'll kind of let that one slip out, but the fact that Agent X is involved in developing energy and involved in the space technology means that's an important connection. Whether or not anything was really going on or not, that connection still is an important issue to keep in the background. So those are the kind of things that I was interested in. That's the kind of thing I was looking at.
Now, one thing that seems strange to me is if you were going to choose somebody to go on this Mars mission thing, I mean, would you choose the granddaughter, famous U.S. president? You know, that never made sense to me. But if you make the connection that, okay, it's to get to her mother on the energy thing, you know, maybe that's more plausible.
Well, and that's, you know, again, I'm looking at the bigger picture, and I'm not making any allegations that any of this was the case. I'm simply saying that if I was a foreign operation and I wanted to penetrate into something like what the Russians were doing here, the Russians that were just sent home here in the last month, networking with some of these people, possibly using their belief systems as a kind of psychological warfare in the sense of their belief systems are a little bit out, you know, I think you'd admit it's a little bit out there to start talking about teleporting people to Mars. So you can take that and you can use that to your advantage if you want to penetrate into, say, a family with someone involved who has influence on U.S. policy. Now, I don't know if there's anything like that going on. I'm simply saying that that's a consideration that we should, you know, keep in mind. But ultimately, what I was really writing about was the fact that Laura, I saw was that Laura was being attacked for a lot of the things she said, and I knew because of my database that the things she was talking about didn't originate in her mind. These were things that she had encountered, things that she had come across because of her relationship with Agent X. And
or was it with her? Was it her? I never really understood that. Was it her relationship with Agent X, or was it growing up with a stepfather, I think he was from Russia, involved in all of this?
Well, no. Most of the ideas that she talked about were things that that Agent X had been working on, which were Agent X really wants to. I think he wants to, because I think he's continuing to do this. He wants to develop the privatization of space travel, and he wants to take it to the next level. He wants to take it to where we're going to have private transportation, trips to the moon, trips to Mars, and to do that, they have to generate the next. They have to create the next level of rocket technology. We're talking, real technology that's, under consideration and at the university level. So he's got people that he talks to, and there's partners that he works with, I think, that are involved in those, working on those ideas and determining how realistic the idea is, and finding ways of making it happen, finding ways of getting funding. So there's this reality there underneath that. The idea of building a Mars base is not. It may not be real now, but going to the moon wasn't a reality either in World War II. Nobody was thinking.
Well, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that totally.
Yeah. So I think it's important, and I think that Laura picked up on a lot of these ideas. Now, the other side of this is the side that Agent X also apparently had some connections with some of the people involved in this paranormal part of the government, or the privatization of the paranormal part of the government. And as you know, Angela, Hal Puthoff was heavily involved in that in the 1970s for the CIA.
Right.
And for some of the other contracts with the Army.
Yeah, I consider Hal a friend of mine.
Yep, and so that there's a reality there. We know that existed. The Stargate files, lay out the whole program for us. So that reality is there. Now the question, where all this comes together, is the question of Chris Robinson, who was the psychic that predicted 9/11, the one who was referred to in the UFO files that were just released. The question of whether or not our government or one of the intelligence agencies is continuing to do the paranormal research, continuing to do the psychic spy stuff. And the best information we've been able to gather so far is that probably someone is. It's either a private operation that's probably contracting with the government, or at least is being monitored by the government, or it may very well be a program operating out of one of the intelligence agencies. And based on what information Chris provided to me, the best information I have says it's either at the National Security Agency or it's with the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is where Stargate was based. And the information from Chris suggests, and this also, there's other people who have talked about this, other sources, suggests that after 9/11, or right prior to 9/11, they felt the need to bring the program back because they were hoping to use it to do a couple things, possibly for prediction, which is actually very hard to do, but predicting future attacks.
Right.
And secondly, monitor or try to penetrate into underground facilities that we couldn't see with our satellites, like the nuclear development facilities in Iran. So these were targets, and Saddam's hideout in Iraq. These were the kind of targets that the psychics were being tasked on after 9/11.
Right.
Now, a lot of the people involved in this are associated with John Peterson's Arlington Institute, and that's probably just, again, we don't know at what level, but we just know that Hal knows John, Kit knows John. There's a lot of these guys who were in the psychic program all know each other.
And was Laura Eisenhower connected to the Arlington Institute somehow?
She did visit there. I'm not sure if it was at the Arlington Institute or at John Peterson's home, but apparently she went with Agent X, and she did meet John and some of his friends, so that she was introduced to them.
Okay. Well, another question here. Okay, let me look here. I'm trying to make sure. I'm looking for New York Lily's question. I know that she posted on here. The questions are going are going so fast in the chat room, it's kind of hard to keep up with them, but it was something. Okay, here it is. This is from New York Lily. Does Gary know anything about the Arlington Institute's recruitment of Catherine Austin Fitts for a plan to climatize people to alien contact?
Okay, what she's referring to, I mentioned that earlier, and that was the discussions that allegedly were taking place. This would have been I think in the late 1990s or maybe early 2000s. But allegedly, there were some fairly high-ranking people visiting at the Arlington Institute, and some of the discussions were about an alleged alien extraterrestrial presence on Earth, and this is according to Catherine Austin Fitts' testimony, which she has online. And so they were discussing how are we going to deal with the alien presence, and how are we going to reveal this information to the public. And now, again, this is all hearsay, so we're dealing with hearsay. What we do know is that this story goes way back. This isn't something new, because we can go back to Ingo Swann, who is a key psychic player in the paranormal part of the government for several decades. And Ingo wrote a book in 1998 called Penetration, which is about partially about his experience with a black ops group who eventually take him to Alaska to actually eyewitness a UFO over a lake. And while they were watching this UFO, it actually attacked them with laser beams, according to his story. So this whole story of connecting the psychic paranormal program to the UFO subject goes way back. And some people believe it's kind of just a mythology that's built up over all these years, and others believe that there maybe is something more to it, that maybe there is some kind of black operation going on, and that at some point they did get Ingo Swann involved to use his psychic abilities to try to discern what the aliens, these alleged aliens, were supposedly up to on the moon and these visitations of these UFOs here to the Earth. So that there is this historical connection. Now, I've also speculated that Ingo's book showed up in 1998, and he talks about this diamond triangular-shaped craft. It's possible that someone asked Ingo to write this book in order to maybe as a cover-up for something we were building. We don't know. We do know that Ingo had, according to the files in Stargate, Ingo had top-secret clearance, and that he was training the military psychics, and they were doing operations, and allegedly even doing psychic operations against UFO targets at some point.
Okay, and this is one of my own questions. How important and how involved do you think Hal Puthoff is still involved?
Well, you know, when we talked about Agent X, there was a series of emails that were provided to me from my source, who actually was down at the Institute with Agent X and Hal at the same time back in 2007. And among those was mentioned that Hal was, quote unquote, on the inside. So I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but it seems to suggest that he's still providing some support to the government at some point, to some level. And we know, of course, Hal has a long history of doing that. And
so do you think he's still important? Do you think he's out of the loop? Is he still working? Is he working privatization as well as government? What's he doing?
Well, I think a lot of this has probably gone to, I think it's privatized, and I think that what happens is that they take ideas that they develop in the private sector and then they present them to the government. Now, the government will monitor what they're doing. I don't think there's any question they're going to monitor what's going on. The question of whether they're funding or supporting them on some secret level, that's another question altogether that we can't answer. What I can tell you is I have a Chinese contact who's named Shan, who's working on quantum physics and the human mind in China. And Dr. Green was also over in China for a while. And I can tell you that there were discussions going on concerning experiments that would be done to basically use functional magnetic resonance imaging to monitor telepathy between human beings.
Wow.
Now, this was going to take, according to the information, and my information was provided from my Chinese contact, and it's important that I mention that my contact in China I developed in the 1990s before I had any contact with Dr. Green or Ron Pandolfi or Dan Smith or any of these people. I independently contacted him based upon research that he had published in the archives, in the physics archives.
Uh-huh.
So he basically provided to me some information, kind of back channel information. I was asking him, so what's going on? I basically introduced him via the internet. I introduced him to Dr. Green because I knew Kit was going to be in China, and then they arranged to meet and discuss these ideas. And then it was taken to another level where it was being discussed, I believe, in different Chinese institutions, and with the idea that there would be support from Hal's laboratory in Texas. So I guess that tells you that there's probably some level that Hal is still working, at least in the
still involved.
Still involved at some level there.
Well, here's a question, since we're talking about Kit Green again. Here's a question from Grant Cameron. Do you know the story of Kit Green contacting Dr. Eric Walker to find out Walker's role in the UFO world?
I vaguely remember that story. I can't remember if it was in Howard Bloom's book or where I read it, but I do recall this Dr. Walker, and my understanding was that there was some conflict or issue or something that came up, but I really can't remember the details at this point.
Okay. Well, here Grant has several questions here, and he sent these to me earlier today. He wants to know, what was the UFO working group? Okay. Was it the Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group?
There's different stories about the UFO working group, and I think Howard Bloom actually started pursuing this, for his book Out There back in the 1990s. It's possible that he was actually getting information about the Stargate program, and maybe some of it was mixed up, but apparently there was some kind of a UFO working group. Ron Pandolfi actually, there was an audio recording made of a phone conversation with Ron Pandolfi from, I think, the early 1990s, where he says that he was a member of the UFO working group, and according to Pandolfi's version of the story, it was Kit Green and John Alexander, Colonel John Alexander, who created the group or started it. Now, there's another version of this UFO working group that I think ties to a top secret document that was leaked out, and I'm not going to go into any specifics on that, but it involved I believe it was a government contractor, and that they were having meetings at a government contractor's facility. they had names and everything listed on the document.
Well, what about John Alexander? Do you think he has the inside information, or is he on the fringe? What do you think?
Well, he's certainly been around the fringe. John apparently has a book coming out, I think, next year. So we might learn some of the secrets from his book when it comes out. I've asked John a few questions, the odd phenomena that have gone on, and we've compared notes on a few things. Well,
do his notes add up with yours? I mean, does he seem to really have the inside story or not?
I think he probably has. Again, when you talk about people being compartmented, and I don't think that John would be the kind of person who would tell us anything top secret. I mean, anything that John is going to reveal is going to be something that's either privately obtained or it's going to be. I don't think he's going to break security clearance. Let me put it that way.
Right.
So whatever we
and understandable, really.
Well, yeah, and that's I mean, everybody wants the government to just reveal all of their secrets, but I mean, they have secrets for a reason. I mean, I guess the debate really needs to be moved into the public. We need to start debating exactly what secrets are valid and reasonable for the government to keep, and for how long, and at what point can that information be revealed. The idea is that the government is supposed to be protecting us from the information.
Protecting us, right. So, I mean, because we're not intelligent enough to be able to absorb it. Is that it? I mean, what is the reason?
Well, Richard Helms ordered. Are you familiar with the MK Ultra, the LSD experiments that the CIA was doing in the 90s?
The LSD experiments, yes.
Okay. I mean, that was just one tiny part of what they were up to, but it was basically, human mind control and things like that. Richard Helms ordered those files to be destroyed in 1973, and as far as they knew, they thought they were all destroyed. And the only reason we learned about the programs was there was a collection of files that they had forgotten about that were later discovered, and just a tiny fraction of what had been going on. So there was an entire body of research that had been conducted that they, some people would call it a cover-up. They destroyed the files because they wanted them, they wanted to cover up what they had been doing. But I believe, actually, the motivation for what Helms did was he felt the research was so dangerous on so many different levels for the American people, for the American psyche, that he ordered the destruction of the files to protect the American public. At least I believe that's what he thought he was doing.
You agree with that?
Well, I can understand the reason for doing it. I think today, obviously in the information age, I think most of us are a lot more aware of things that are going on and things that could be happening, and probably would be able to handle a lot more than maybe we could have 30 years ago. But
it's a lot different now, isn't it? With the internet, it's so different than it was 30 years ago.
There's so much information out there. People are more aware. People are more open to ideas, and whether it's that we're being visited from space, or the fact that the government has maybe conducted experiments that we would find very disturbing. Whatever it would be, I think people are a little bit more prepared to deal with it and try to handle it. I think I don't know if it was Kit Green, but one of the guys in that group had said something to the effect that there was additional information that the public would not do well with it. They wouldn't handle it well. Now, he never really hinted at what that was or what he was referring to, but I think that's still an attitude that's out there, that some of this information is very disturbing. Whatever it's about, it's just extremely disturbing, and the public would not handle it.
I don't know what would happen. If somebody came forward, if the president, whoever came forward and said, okay, we have been in contact with ETs for the last 60 years, and we've been hiding it from you because we thought you couldn't, and now we think you can. I mean, I don't know what would happen. Would people run to the emergency rooms? Would they be grabbing all the groceries off the shelves? Would they be down on their knees praying? Or would they go, oh, okay, yeah, we've been hearing about this for a while. We're kind of acclimated. Am I supposed to get up and go to work tomorrow? What's the new deal?
Well, I'll tell you, Angela, what I think is that what we've been acclimated to as a society is Hollywood. And we have this kind of Hollywood idea of what is out there and what it should be that we're, if any of this is real, what we're experiencing, we interpret it in terms of Hollywood and the images that have been shown to us on television and in the movies.
Right.
And the reality behind it could be extremely disturbing. It could be much different than what we are prepared for based on what we've seen coming from Hollywood. It could be something maybe beyond our normal means of processing. Physicists like to talk about whether or not the human mind is capable of understanding the universe. Our minds, we understand advanced mathematics and concepts, whereas if you take your pet dog, there's no way you can teach a dog Einstein's equations. It's not something that the brain of your pet dog can comprehend. And it's possible that whatever we're dealing with is even farther removed from us than that. It may very well be that our minds literally cannot process the information. We simply don't have that capability of processing what's going on. So,
and why do you feel that way? I mean, do you think that we're just not intelligent enough, or our emotions are too intense?
Well, I think we have to look at the scale of the universe. I mean, one of the reasons why they're starting to, scientists are beginning to take the idea of life in other worlds, is because the universe is so vast, and we're finding that there's so many planets out there, and there's so much that could be there, that it just seems almost inevitable that there's some kind of intelligence besides ours. Now, the universe is also vast in terms of time, and we haven't been around that long compared to the age of the universe. So it's very possible that intelligence out there has developed way beyond anything we are capable of comprehending in our brains. That's just simply so far beyond us. And now we're reaching an age where we're actually going to be faced with the possibility of building things that will out-process our capability of thinking. Building new kinds of computers and machinery that may very well evolve beyond us to the point where we simply won't be able to relate to them anymore.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's really, in my book, that was kind of the point I was trying to make, and it was tied into Kit Green's study, because Kit was tasked by the Defense Intelligence Agency when he was with the Tiger Committee. He was tasked to look at advances in the neurosciences, what kind of surprise technology might threaten the United States national security. And when you start to really think about that, you realize that there's so much going on in the development of technology, that would affect the human mind, that we're really facing almost the creation of an alien intelligence just from our technology. At some point, we're going to be maybe facing it's kind of like the story of Frankenstein. We might create something outside of our control that goes beyond our ability to handle it. So I consider that's the real warning.
But if we can't handle it, can the powers that be handle it? That I don't know.
Well, and that was the other point that the Tiger Committee that Kit's on. One of the things that one of the points they made is the fact that the people that run our government, the policymakers, do not understand these technologies. And the people in charge literally are at that point already where they cannot comprehend or understand the threat behind the technologies. And so the idea is we need to be able to educate our policymakers so that they understand what we're facing, and whether that's an alien invasion or something we create here on the Earth.
All right. Well, here's another question: are there any contactees, abductees, however you want to phrase that you feel are legit?
Okay, that's kind of a loaded question. I think there is this is sort of tied into that whole thing about the human mind.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, we really don't understand as much as we understand about the brain, as much as we're learning about the material part of our brains and using technologies to monitor the brain. They're getting to the point now where they can use fMRIs to determine whether you're lying, what you're going to think, what the word is or the object that you just saw is. They can look at the image of your brain and determine how that matches up to a word or an image. So we're advancing that way, but we don't understand the most basic thing, which is why do we experience being? What is it that makes us conscious? What is consciousness? That's still a mystery. So, and that's kind of the essence of the human mind and the human spirit. Why do people have out-of-body experiences? Why does someone observe themselves under surgery? And see what all the doctors are doing, even though they're unconscious at the time.
Or an after-death experience.
Or an after-death experience. Or, in some cases, these, experiences of what appear to be intelligent beings that you're interacting with. So what is that exactly? I mean, I don't think we really know enough to be able to say what it's all about.
Well, are there any cases of abductees, contactees that you feel are credible?
Well,
I mean, can you name a couple or not? Or would you go, no, I don't really believe any of them. What do you think?
Well, I did, at one point I asked Stanley Krippner, who's a pretty well-known parapsychologist and dream researcher. He did some of the original dream telepathy experiments back, I think, in the 1960s. And, he directed me towards the literature on these lucid dream experiences. So, from his point of view, his scientific mind tells him that this is, this kind of phenomena is some kind of a lucid dream. Now, that doesn't really solve the mystery because things happen in these dreams. We get information about distant places or people that may.
Or they wake up with marks on their body they didn't have. And Roger Lear, what about Roger Lear, the doctor that removes these implants?
I haven't. That's not something I've pursued. Certainly, if somebody could prove that something was extraterrestrial in origin, an implant or something, if they could prove that object did not originate on the Earth, that would be interesting. I think that based on the technologies we're developing, our own technology, I think in 50 years we're going to be able to easily recreate these alien abduction experiences artificially. So,
do you think it could already be being done without our knowledge?
Well,
artificially,
it's not impossible. The black world often invents something that we reinvent in the white world 20 years later. So it's possible that 20 years ago or 30 years ago that they may have been able to do things that we're only beginning to do now in the open world.
But I really want to know what you think. Do you think people are being abducted, or it's lucid dreams, or what?
I think it's a kind of a lucid dream. I think it's a kind of a spiritual experience. That's sort of the word we use to lump it, a lot of these phenomena together. I think it has to do with this problem of why we have consciousness and why we experience being, why do you experience being one person instead of all these, trillions of things that are going on in your body and the atoms and the molecules and everything? What is it that unifies all that into your single experience of consciousness? So that's still a mystery, and I think it's too soon for us to really say, what it's all about. But I think these, I've had hypnagogic experiences, these lucid dream experiences. They're interesting. They're strange. They can be disturbing in some cases. I think there's probably some people that have them fairly often, and maybe there's something causing that. Maybe that's part of it. But I did read Kitt's study, and he does actually bring that up in the Tiger study. They mention these. They mention false memories, and the problem that the intelligence community is facing is, as they look at using things like brain scanners to determine if you're lying or if you're a terrorist, they still cannot determine for certain if you believe something, but it may not be true. In other words, these false memories, these experiences of alien abductions are so traumatic that your body literally experiences it as if it was real. And ultimately, everything that we know is our experience. Everything that we know comes from our conscious experience. So when you experience something as real, even if it may not be real in the ordinary sense, you're still experiencing it as if it was real. And in a certain sense, it is real. It's just not part of the ordinary world. But it's still just as real as any other conscious experience.
Well, it's like somebody that's delusional. They're being very truthful. They're telling it as they know it. It's not a lie. It's what they believe, and it's very difficult to detect that.
Well, it's more than a belief, though, because it's what they're literally experiencing.
Right.
It's as if they're experiencing being in a different universe or a different world, but it's just as real to them as our ordinary reality. We have a reality, we call it a consensus reality, because we all agree this is what is real, and we kind of all go along every day, reinforcing each other's belief system as far as what is real and what isn't real. And for some of these other kind of more bizarre experiences, like these alien abductions, the person experiencing that, it's just as real as any other, real experience is. Their body reacts to it. They've done studies where they can see the trauma. They react as if they're experiencing post-traumatic stress when they describe these experiences. So it's very real. It's just not necessarily on the same level of reality as our ordinary reality.
Well, we've got about 3 minutes left here. I know I've kept you longer than I said I would. I'm sorry about that. But you just have so much information. But I would just like to hear from you. We've covered a lot of stuff tonight, a lot of topics, a broad range. Is there anything that you would like to bring up that you feel is important?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues. There's the issue of government secrecy as far as, you could look at a program like Stargate, and in retrospect you go, why was this even secret in the first place? You got a bunch of guys sitting in a room imagining what's going on in Russia. I mean, and it was classified. It was compartmented. It was held as a tightly held secret among small groups of people.
Yeah.
And so, the one big question is, so what are they doing in secret now? And what kind of programs are in those compartments, and who's responsible? Where is the accountability? I think that's a really important issue, because no one seems to be accountable, to all of these different programs.
Yeah, and we're supposed to have all this transparency in the Obama administration. I don't see that.
No, I really, it's true that there are some documents trickling out, but they redact all the information that they consider sensitive anyway, so ultimately we never see it. That's one issue for me that I think is very important. And the other issue is this issue of technology and where are we going with our technology. Our technology is literally at the point now where it's changing what we are. We're no longer using technology for our benefit. Technology is actually using us. You hear this all the time about people who have internet addictions or information overload. I mean, there's all these things that are taking place. People that are addicted to their BlackBerry. We are just barely tapping the tip of that iceberg, and it's going to get a lot worse because in 10 years, it may very well be that the interface we use for these devices will no longer be our hands. We won't be typing information. We're going to go directly from our mind into these devices. And at that point, it's going to be almost as if it was telepathy. We're going to operate our machinery by thought.
And at that point, it seems to me there would be no secrets. If your mind is the access, then they can probably get to whatever they want.
Well, that's the other side of that they're already developing, the ways of reading the mind using machinery, and it's very primitive at this point, but it's certainly ongoing, and they're learning more all the time. And it's kind of a two-sided, it's a double-edged sword. As we learn how to use our thoughts to control devices, the devices will also be able to start reading our thoughts to see what we're thinking. And literally, we're going to have this kind of mind meld with the machines, with the computers. And at some point, if those machines become more intelligent than we are, they may, at some point, determine that we're no longer of any use to them.
It's kind of Star Trek-y, isn't it?
It's very, very Star Trek-y. But this is real. It's real stuff. It's not here yet, but the internet wasn't here 20 years ago for the most part. Not like it is today. So, so we need to think about what are the things we're doing now. What are they going to become in 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
Gary, I've really enjoyed this interview, and I've really enjoyed talking with you tonight. And I'm so glad we finally got together. But we are out of time. Imagine that.
Well, thank you, Angela. It was great. I had a great time, and we did touch on a lot of great topics. And there's plenty more to discuss. So maybe we can do this again sometime.
Well, I would love that, and I know Grant Cameron is very upset because he couldn't listen tonight, and I know he has a lot more questions. I just got a few from him tonight, but anyway, I appreciate you, and I appreciate all the listeners on the Joiner Report tonight. Remember, next week we will have a report from Leslie Kane on her new book coming out August the 10th, available on Amazon, and God, the name escapes me. And but anyway, and then the second hour next week will be from Frank Warren and his Oregon investigation. He's on his way home tonight, so we should hear something about that. Thank you for listening, and good night.